This is the Money Hour with your host, Tina Mitchell, on Alternative Talk, AM 1150. Now, back to the show with local mortgage and finance expert, Tina Mitchell.
Welcome back to the Money Hour with your host and mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell, right here on 1150 AM KKNW, the Saturday, July 25th show. I'm empowering our community, providing you with opportunities and solutions when it comes to your money. If you're hearing my show at a different time or day, you are listening to a rebroadcast. You can talk to my guests that I have in studio. Just call the show at 1-855-400-1150 or online at themoneyhour.com. And in studio right now, Greg Prill with Coldwell banker Bain. Greg, thanks for coming back in studio.
Thank you so much for having me, Tina.
And we have some interesting topics different than what we usually have from our real estate experts, and it's just an exciting show. Greg, having you discuss kind of what's happening in my arena with TRID, so it's going to be interesting to hear your perspective on the new regulations. And a little bit about Greg. Greg, again, is with Coldwell banker Bain, graduated from the University of California and Chicago Kent College of Law in Chicago, Illinois. Greg is a licensed Washington State real estate broker and also is a licensed attorney in Illinois and Washington State with 15 years experience in negotiating complex contracts and problem solving. Greg is a broker with Coldwell banker Bain. He is also a member of the National Association of Realtors and the Seattle King County Association of Realtors. Greg combines his two areas of professional expertise to provide his clients with the best advocacy possible in today's complicated real estate market. So, Greg, let's talk a little bit today about the lending regulations and the effect of buyers and sellers. So there's a lot that's been happening with the Consumer Financing Protection Bureau, and being in law, I would love to hear your description of why CFPB was created.
Yeah, so CFPB, again, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was actually the brainchild of a current United States Senator, Elizabeth Warren. And her idea was, for many, many years prior to the meltdown in 2008, was to create an independent government body that was really interested in protecting consumers' rights, whether it be in real estate or credit cards, anything that had to do with lending. She wanted to make sure that people were protected, and that's really where CFPB comes from. It was her brainchild, and she was actually the director of CFPB prior to the current fellow who's the head of it. It was created as a consequence of the Dodd-Frank bill. Yes. Which
many things have came out of the Dodd-Frank bill.
Many things have come.
Good and not so good, but another show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's really interesting about CFPB is that many people assume that because the underlying intention was for it to be helpful, that it actually would be helpful. And a lot of people think that, well, gosh, you're a lawyer, Greg, so you must think that more laws and more regulations help things. And I take a slightly different viewpoint on that. I'm not entirely convinced that if you slap on more laws and more regulation, things are going to become better. And I just like to point out something that a lot of folks don't take into consideration. We've been thinking about these new regulations, which are called TRID, T-R-I-D, for the past 2.5 or so years. We are now in a state of the real estate market where most people in our region have gotten back to where they were about the time when the meltdown happened. And we've done that through just the average ebb and flow of the real estate market. And lenders and people who are helping out lenders have done a really great job of cleaning up their own house. Because they don't want to see a bunch of bad loans as we saw prior to 2008 happening again. So, we have a rule that's coming out, and that's what they call a regulation in the federal government, and it's about,
which has been extended.
Absolutely.
August 3rd is the now new date, so we'll see if it gets extended again. But
what's really interesting is that about a week and a half ago, the head of CFPB essentially acknowledged that there was going to be a problem with the interpretation of the rule. So there's now a question as well, is it going to be August or is it going to be October? It would be my preference that we're looking at October as opposed to August, mainly because when you're dealing with an 1,889-page rule, there's always going to be something that wasn't intended.
Yes.
And when you get language in this rule that says things and this is going to be scintillating radio for just 2 or 3 seconds, Tina. When you get a rule that say things along the lines of Form H24A through G, H25A through J, and H28A through J are model forms for the disclosure required under subsections 1026, et cetera,
yes,
et cetera,
yes.
et cetera. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why CFPB is taking a step back. Mm-hmm. Again, in relation to...
Well, it's still a lot of the regulations that have came out of the Dodd-Frank Act, there's still confusion, and lenders are, the comp plan with mortgage professionals is a big one. So I want to ask you, Greg, from the broker side of it, what are the brokers out there saying? I know what we're saying on the lending side to the new lending regulations, but how's the conversation going over in your arena?
Absolutely. So some of the brokers in my office are a little scared of it. Mm-hmm. I'm less scared of these things, not because I'm a lawyer, but because I know that eventually things sort of shake out.
Sure.
And we have good professionals like you, Tina, who are out there who are giving us the kind of advice that we need. And a couple of times earlier in today's program, you mentioned, look, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a realtor. And realtors really have to rely upon the expertise of other people in order to fill in the gaps.
Of course.
And so, part of the reason why I'm here today is that we have so much conversation going on in our office about these new regulations. That I thought it would be helpful to your audience to sort of talk about what realtors are going to be talking to their clients about. And the first thing that I think that realtors really have to be concentrating on, and by extension their clients, are some of the notification timelines that we're talking about. So one of the most important things that, say, a buyer has to be aware of if there is some sort of a material change to their application.
Yes.
And we'll let others sort of define what those material changes are. There are certain time frames that could extend the amount of time that's required for their closing to happen. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a good relationship with your realtor, and your realtor doesn't have a good relationship with the seller's broker, well, you might find yourself in a circumstance where you've got unnecessary confrontation between the two parties. So what the Northwest Multiple Listing Service has done is they've started creating some new forms out there that I think are going to be a little bit helpful in the sense that in the past, if a seller wanted more information about a buyer's application, it was rather difficult to get that information. There are some new forms that are coming out that are going to allow a listing broker to contact the buyer's broker and say, hey, we'd like some more information about what exactly it is that you've given to your lender to figure out whether or not this deal is going to have any complications later on down the road. So that's one of the things that your local MLS is doing for you, and that's something that you should probably be talking to your broker about right now, just so that you have all of the information that's absolutely necessary to ensure that your closing happens in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and one of the myths out there that they're talking about is the pre-approval process is going to be not the pre-approval process because clients are not providing all their documentation, which that's actually a myth because it really just on the lending side, it's a suggestion, not a requirement. So a client can make the decision whether or not they want to take the suggestion of their mortgage consultant, which is to provide the documents.
Yes.
If they don't want to, they don't have to.
Absolutely.
But, why would anybody not do that? Because they're still not going to be in a position to be a strong offer in a negotiation situation in a multiple offer scenario. So I want to talk a little bit about the timeline and the closing process and how is the real estate community communicating as far as closing dates and the effect of TRID on closing dates.
Well, we are sort of spoiled right now in the real estate business.
You guys are really spoiled. Yes, you are.
I saw you kind of take a deep breath there. And realtors are very spoiled in that we've gotten used to the idea of a 30-day close. Let's go ahead and get that done. Whereas in the past, you were talking about, well, maybe 30 days, maybe 45 days because stuff happened. What these new regulations, in my estimation, are going to result in are closing dates that are happening a little bit longer than 30 days. That's just human nature.
Yep.
A buyer may not have provided every single bit, jot and tittle of information that was required of them.
Sure.
Alternatively, lenders may not have given an appropriate disclosure at some point during this process. Now, I know that never happens with you, Tina, because you do such a great job on these things.
Very rarely.
But, I mean, I have unfortunately been in circumstances where a lender has had to sort of, switch gears at a last minute.
Sure.
And that's been very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
Now, not only is it frustrating, but there are federal laws that are in place.
They can't switch at the last minute and not lose time. And then you've got the extra days at the end from the time the client signs their documents to where it can actually fund. So I totally agree with you. And I think sometimes you're hearing lenders that are going, well, we need 60 days to close. I don't think it's going to go to that extreme. I think if we could move things and all work together as a team on the real estate and lending and go, let's just change the practice from 30 days to 45 days. Here's the reality is before Dodd-Frank came in, we were closing on 30 days. So we haven't made any adjustments to the closing. And that was back when you didn't have to provide any documentation. Now we're providing documentation. We're getting third verifications on all the documentation, including information waiting from the IRS. So it would just make things easier. And I've said with my realtor partners, it really doesn't, the seller doesn't know the difference or a buyer doesn't know the difference between a 30 and 45 day close. They don't. Yeah. It's all based on the expectations that we're setting up. So any suggestions that you have for the real estate community and really coming together and making this a successful process for all of us?
Let's not be lone wolves. A lot of us are entrepreneurial to a fault. And if you have a team, if you have a trusted group of people who you've worked with in the past, feel free to expand that team and have that level of trust. And if you have that level of trust, there's going to be open and honest communication. When there's open and honest levels of communication, guess what? There aren't misunderstandings. Sure. And if there aren't misunderstandings, you're going to have a very smooth closing process. I also think that it's helpful for realtors to start getting their clients used to the idea of maybe a 45-day close. Not that a 30-day can't happen, but let's just not sort of get into a circumstance where we have an unrealistic expectation of a 30-day when 45 days is much, much more likely to occur.
I totally agree. So what about the craziness of the real estate market that we got a little bit of that going on right now? What do you think it's going to do when we add one more little crazy thing to it?
I think there's probably going to be about 6 months of people not fully understanding what the consequences are going to be. And if you aren't prepared either as a realtor or as a lender or as a consumer in this market, you're going to set yourself up for a little bit of frustration and disappointment. But again, if you keep those open lines of communication and you're willing to listen to your team members, I think that ultimately what you're going to have is a circumstance where everybody is much happier at the end.
Yeah.
And frankly, dealing with lenders on sometimes a daily basis, they have done just such a wonderful job in cleaning up their own houses over the past several years. I'm not confident that these regulations are going to help anything, but I do know that the individual contributions from the lenders out there are really going to fill in any gaps that the regulations aren't taking care of. And hopefully these regulations don't make our lenders' jobs any more difficult than they need to be.
Well, all of them do. And I look at it as it really boils down to just needing our services even more so because it is such a hard work. But I do want to say this, that from the real estate community and the lending community, as well as the consumers, we're all in this together as a team.
That's right.
It's a team effort to make the process happen. I'll tell you, it is not fun. It's not fun out on the real estate market. It's not fun in the lending industry. Why tell our buyers and sellers that it is going to be fun? It's a lot of work. There's a lot of paperwork. Everything needs to be done quickly, but there's an end in sight. So focus on that 30, 45 days down the road and know that you're going to get into your home, but we need your help in order to do it. So that would be my suggestion to buyers and sellers. We've got to wrap up my time here, Greg, but give a tip to buyers, sellers when it comes to TRID.
Know that life is complicated. No matter what aspect of it you're dealing with, TRID is going to add another level of complication. But if you have a great team behind you, somebody who's making sure that you're fully educated as to the process, I think that ultimately you're going to be happy with your transaction. But go with the flow. If you've got a trusted group of people who are out there helping you, they're going to do right by you, I think. Well
said. I had one of my partners tell me it's like a 30-car pileup in LA, but in this one, nobody dies. So it's all good. We're going to make it through it.
That's right.
Greg, thank you so much for coming back in studio. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up next in the Money Hour, why now the perfect time might be to buy a HUD property and learn to save 30 to 50%, maybe a little bit more than list price. Got Larry Goins with the Goins Group right here in 1150 AM KKNW after this short break.